The snow fell heavily outside Riverside Community Hospital. Dr. Marcus Johnson looked through the emergency room windows at the white blanket covering everything in sight. The weather report called it the worst blizzard to hit the city in 20 years. Roads were closed and the governor had declared a state of emergency. Marcus checked his watch. It was just past 11 at night, and he had been working since 7 in the morning. His shift was supposed to end at 8, but 3 doctors couldn't make it to the hospital because of the storm. As the only attending physician who lived close enough to walk to work, Marcus found himself managing the emergency department alone. "Dr. Johnson," called Nurse Betty from the front desk. "We just got word that the power is out in the east side of town. They're expecting more cases of hypothermia soon." Marcus nodded and rubbed his tired eyes. "Thanks, Betty. Let's make sure we have warming blankets ready." He walked to the break room to pour another cup of coffee. The vending machine kind, bitter and too strong, but it kept him awake. This was his 4th cup tonight. As he took a sip, his pager buzzed. Another patient. Back at the front desk, Betty handed him a chart. Fell on the ice outside her apartment. Possible broken wrist. Marcus took the chart and headed to examination room 3. Mrs. Miller, a gray-haired woman in her 70s, sat holding her arm carefully. "Good evening, Mrs. Miller. I'm Dr. Johnson. Let's take a look at that wrist." 30 minutes later, after sending Mrs. Miller for an X-ray, Marcus checked on his other patients. A young man with a sprained ankle. A family of 4 with minor injuries from a fender bender. A child with a high fever. The emergency room was busier than usual for a Tuesday night. Just as he finished updating a patient's chart, the emergency doors burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher, their uniforms covered in snow. "What do we have?" Marcus called, running toward them. "Male, around 40, found unconscious in a crashed car about a mile from here," said the first paramedic, a woman named Diane. Car slid off the road into a ditch. No ID on him. Suffering from hypothermia, possible internal bleeding, and a head injury. Marcus looked down at the unconscious man. He wore an expensive suit, now torn and bloody. His face was pale with a deep gash across his forehead. "Get him to trauma room 1, Marcus ordered. "Betty, call anyone who can make it in. I'm going to need help." The nurses moved quickly, transferring the man from the stretcher to the hospital bed. Marcus cut away the wet clothes and examined the patient. The man's body temperature was dangerously low. His pupils were uneven when Marcus shined a light in his eyes, a bad sign that suggested brain injury. "Let's get him warmed up carefully," Marcus said. "And I need a head CT immediately." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The scan showed bleeding and swelling in the man's brain. Without surgery, he would die. Marcus called the neurosurgeon. On call Dr. Patel, but she was stuck at home with no way to reach the hospital. "I can talk you through it," Dr. Patel said over the phone, "but you'll have to perform the procedure." Marcus had assisted with brain surgeries during his residency, but he had never led one himself. He took a deep breath. There was no choice. "Prep the OR," he told the nurses. "We're going in." The operating room was cold and bright. Marcus stood over the unconscious patient, Dr. Patel's voice in his ear through a headset. "Make a burr hole 2 centimeters above the right ear," she instructed. "Go slowly." Marcus's hands were steady as he worked, following Dr. Patel's directions step by step. The procedure was to relieve the pressure on the man's brain by draining the blood that was building up. "That's it," Dr. Patel said after 2 hours. "You've done it, Marcus. Now we wait." By 4 in the morning, the stranger was stable but still unconscious. Marcus sat beside the bed in the ICU, monitoring the man's vital signs. The storm continued to rage outside. "Who are you?" Marcus wondered aloud, looking at the man's face. Without identification, they had no way to contact his family. The police had the license plate from his car, an expensive foreign model, but with the city shut down by the storm, the search for information would have to wait. The man was handsome, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples. Hands showed no signs of manual labor, soft with manicured nails. His suit, even torn and bloodied, was clearly expensive. A wealthy businessman, perhaps, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Your guardian angel was working overtime tonight, Marcus said softly. Another hour out there in the cold, and we wouldn't be having this one-sided conversation. He checked the IV drip and the monitors one more time. The man's brain pressure had stabilized, and his body temperature was almost back to normal. The surgery had gone well, but the next 24 hours would be critical. A nurse named Grace came to check on them. Dr. Johnson, you should get some rest. You've been on your feet for over 20 hours. Marcus shook his head. I'll stay a bit longer. This is a delicate time. Grace nodded, understanding. I'll bring you some more coffee. As the night turned to morning, the snow finally began to slow. First light crept through the windows, casting a soft glow over the hospital room. Marcus had dozed off in the chair, his white coat pulled around him like a blanket. He woke with a start when one of the monitors beeped. The man's heart rate had increased slightly, a good sign. Marcus checked his pupils again, still uneven, but more responsive than before. You're fighting, Marcus said. Good. By noon, more staff had managed to reach the hospital. Dr. Levine, an older doctor who had trudged through the snow for nearly 2 hours to get there, took over Marcus's patients. You performed brain surgery? Dr. Levine asked, impressed as he reviewed the mystery patient's chart. With Dr. Patel on the phone, Marcus explained. It wasn't ideal, but there was no other option. You likely saved his life, Dr. Levine said. Now go get some sleep in the on-call room, you've earned it. Marcus was too tired to argue. He checked on his other patients one last time, then made his way to the small room with a cot where doctors could rest during long shifts. He fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. When he woke, the clock showed 6 in the evening. He had slept for nearly 5 hours. Marcus washed his face in the small sink and went to check on the mystery patient. The man was still unconscious, but his vital signs had improved. His color was better, and the brain pressure had continued to decrease. We're moving him to room 315, Nurse Betty told Marcus. Dr. Levine says he's stable enough to leave the ICU. Marcus nodded. I'll keep an eye on him. For the rest of the evening, as the hospital settled into a quieter rhythm, Marcus found himself returning to room 315 between seeing other patients. There was something about this man that intrigued him. Perhaps it was the circumstances of their meeting, or maybe it was simply the mystery of who he was. When you wake up, Marcus said during his final check before ending his extended shift, you'll have quite a story to hear. As Marcus finally left the hospital and walked home through the snow-covered streets, he had no idea that this stranger would soon change his life forever. 3 days passed before the mystery patient showed any signs of waking up. Marcus checked on him whenever he could, even though the man wasn't officially his patient anymore. Dr. Levine had taken over the case, but he didn't mind Marcus's interest. It was early afternoon when Marcus stopped by room 315 after finishing his rounds. The snow outside had mostly melted and the city was slowly returning to normal. As Marcus checked the patient's chart, he noticed a slight movement from the bed. The man's fingers twitched. Then his eyelids fluttered. Marcus moved closer. Can you hear me? The man's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light. He looked confused, his gaze moving around the room before settling on Marcus. Where am I? He asked, his voice rough from disuse. You're at Riverside Community Hospital, Marcus replied. I'm Dr. Johnson. You were in an accident during the snowstorm 3 days ago. Your car went off the road about a mile from here. The man tried to sit up but winced in pain. Take it easy, Marcus said, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. You had a serious head injury. We had to perform surgery to relieve pressure on your brain. The man laid back, his hand moving up to touch the bandage on his head. Surgery? Yes. You also had hypothermia and some minor internal bleeding, but those issues are resolving well. Marcus poured a cup of water from the pitcher by the bed and handed it to him. Small sips. The man drank carefully. Thank you. He paused, looking at Marcus more intently. You're the one who operated on me? Marcus nodded. I was the only doctor available. The storm made it impossible for the neurosurgeon to get to the hospital, so she guided me through the procedure over the phone. Something like respect flickered in the man's eyes. "You saved my life. Just doing my job," Marcus said with a small smile. "We still don't know who you are. There was no identification in your pockets, and your car registration information hasn't come through yet. The police have been trying to find out." The man seemed to consider this for a moment. "My name is Richard Carter. I was in town for a business meeting when the storm hit. I tried to drive back to my hotel, but the roads were worse than I expected." Marcus made a note in the chart. "Well, Mr. Carter, it's good to finally meet you. I'll let the nurses know you're awake, and I'll inform the police so they can stop their search." "Dr. Johnson," Richard called as Marcus turned to leave. "Thank you again." Over the next few days, Richard's condition improved steadily. The hospital located his belongings from the car, including his phone and wallet, which had slid under the seat during the crash. Richard made several calls, and soon flowers and gift baskets arrived for the hospital staff. Marcus continued to visit Richard daily. During these visits, they talked about many things. Richard asked questions about the hospital, about Marcus's background, and seemed genuinely interested in the challenges of providing healthcare in an underserved community. "How long have you worked here?" Richard asked one afternoon. 5 years, Marcus replied. "I did my residency at County General downtown, but I wanted to work where I could make a real difference." "And do you make a difference?" Marcus looked out the window before answering. "Some days more than others. We're always short-staffed, underfunded, and overwhelmed with patients. But yes, I think we do make a difference to the people who come through those doors." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "What made you want to become a doctor?" "My grandmother," Marcus said with a smile. "She was a nurse for 40 years. She used to tell me stories about helping people, saving lives. I wanted to do that too." As they talked, Marcus learned more about Richard as well. He was 42, never married, and ran a large technology company. He traveled frequently for business and lived mainly in a city about 3 hours away. "What kind of technology does your company develop?" Marcus asked. "We started with software, but we've expanded into various fields," Richard explained. "Recently, we've been looking at healthcare applications. That's actually why I was in town, meeting with some local hospital administrators about potential partnerships." "Not this hospital, I assume," Marcus said with a laugh. "We can barely afford to update our computers." "No, not Riverside," Richard agreed. "But maybe it should have been." A week after waking up, Richard was ready to be discharged. His assistant had brought him fresh clothes and had arranged for a car to take him home. As the nurse went through the discharge paperwork, Marcus came to say goodbye. "Well, Mr. Carter, it looks like you're good to go. Remember to follow up with a neurologist in 2 weeks and call immediately if you experience any of the symptoms we discussed." Richard stood up, looking much more like the successful businessman he was despite the healing cut on his forehead. "I will, and please call me Richard." "Take care of yourself, Richard," Marcus said, extending his hand. Richard shook it firmly. "You know, Dr. Johnson, you saved my life during that storm. I won't forget that." Marcus shrugged. "Just doing my job. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Richard insisted, his eyes serious. "Not anyone. Not the way you did it. I've been in enough hospitals to know that what you did was exceptional." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. "I have your name, Dr. Marcus Johnson," Richard said with a small smile. "Remember that I have your name." With that cryptic statement, Richard left, walking out of the hospital with his assistant by his side. Life at Riverside Community Hospital returned to its normal hectic pace. The story of Marcus performing emergency brain surgery during the snowstorm became hospital legend, with details growing more dramatic with each retelling. Marcus himself tried to downplay it, focusing instead on his regular duties and the constant stream of patients needing care. 2 weeks after Richard's discharge, Marcus had almost forgotten about his mysterious patient. He was working another long shift when the hospital administrator, Paula Wright, called him to her office. Paula was a stern woman in her 50s who rarely smiled and was constantly worried about the hospital's budget. Being summoned to her office was rarely a good thing. "You wanted to see me?" Marcus asked, standing in her doorway. Paula looked up from her computer. "Yes, Dr. Johnson. There's someone here to see you." Marcus frowned, confused. "A patient?" "No," Paula said, and Marcus was surprised to see her lips twitch into something close to a smile. "He's in the conference room. He asked to speak with you privately." More confused than ever, Marcus made his way to the small conference room at the end of the hall. When he opened the door, he was shocked to find Richard Carter sitting at the table. Richard looked dramatically different from the patient who had left the hospital. Dressed in an impeccable dark blue suit and radiating confidence, he stood up to greet Marcus with a warm smile. "Dr. Johnson, thank you for meeting with me." "Mr. Carter," Marcus said, surprised. "You're looking well." "Thanks to you," Richard replied. "And please, I thought we agreed you'd call me Richard." Richard gestured for Marcus to sit, then took his own seat. "I promised myself that if I ever got out of that hospital bed, I would come back here, and now I have." "Is everything okay?" Marcus asked. "No complications from your injury?" "I'm fine," Richard assured him. "I'm not here as a patient. I'm here because I made a promise to myself about you." Marcus waited, unsure where this was going. "What I didn't tell you during my stay is that I'm the CEO of Carter Innovations. We're one of the largest technology companies in the country." Marcus's eyes widened. He had heard of Carter Innovations. Everyone had. The company was worth billions. "I've come back," Richard continued, "because I want to thank you properly, and because I think we can help each other." Marcus stared at Richard, trying to process what he had just heard. Carter Innovations was one of the most successful tech companies in the world. Even someone like Marcus, who barely had time to follow business news, knew the name. "I looked you up after I went home," Richard continued. "Your work here is impressive, especially given the limited resources." Marcus shifted in his seat. "I appreciate that, but I'm just doing my job like everyone else here." Richard shook his head. "No, you're doing much more than that. The nurses told me everything while I was recovering. How you work extra shifts because the hospital is understaffed. How you sometimes buy medications for patients who can't afford them. How you performed a complex brain surgery during a snowstorm when you could have easily said it was beyond your expertise." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. "Why are you really here, Richard?" Richard opened a sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I'm here to make you a proposal." He slid the folder across the table. "Carter Innovations is expanding its healthcare division. We're developing new medical technologies, particularly for underserved communities." Marcus opened the folder. Inside were documents outlining a multi-million-dollar grant to Riverside Community Hospital, focused on expanding the emergency department and trauma center. "This is..." Marcus couldn't find the words. "The first step," Richard said. "There's more." He pulled another document from his briefcase. "We want to establish a research foundation focused on developing affordable medical technology for underserved communities. And we want you to head it." Marcus looked up from the papers, stunned. "Me? Why me? I'm not a researcher. I'm just a doctor trying to keep people alive in an underfunded hospital." "That's exactly why." Richard leaned forward. "You understand the real needs of these communities because you live it every day. You know what works and what doesn't in the real world, not just in theory." Marcus flipped through the documents, his mind racing. The numbers were staggering. This kind of money could transform Riverside Hospital completely. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why would you do this because I treated you during the storm?" Richard's expression turned serious. "When I was lying in that hospital bed, I had a lot of time to think. My company has been successful beyond my wildest dreams. We've made incredible technological advances. But what good is all that if it doesn't help people who really need it?" He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. "My car accident was a wake-up call. I could have died on that road. Instead, I was saved by a doctor who performed brain surgery with a phone as his guide in a hospital that can barely afford to keep its lights on." Richard turned back to Marcus. "I've learned about your research on portable diagnostic equipment for rural communities. It's brilliant, but it's stalled because you don't have the resources to develop it further. Marcus was surprised. He had published a single paper on the topic 3 years ago, but had to abandon the project to focus on his clinical duties. How did you know about that? Richard smiled. I do my homework. Carter Innovations can provide the resources to make that research a reality. Not just here, but globally. Marcus sat back, overwhelmed. This is a lot to take in. I understand. Richard nodded. Take some time to think about it. The grant for the hospital isn't contingent on your acceptance of the research position. That's happening regardless. Why? Marcus asked again. There are brilliant doctors all over the country working on similar projects, many with more experience and credentials than me. Richard sat down again. Because you didn't just save my life, Dr. Johnson. You showed compassion and dedication in circumstances where most would have given up. The nurses told me you stayed with me even when your shift ended. He continued. And frankly, I've done my research since then. Your publications on healthcare inequality are compelling. You have the vision and the expertise. What you've lacked are resources. Marcus took a deep breath. This could change everything for our patients. Exactly. Richard nodded. That's the idea. The door opened and Paula Wright, the hospital administrator, poked her head in. Her usually stern face was flushed with excitement. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Johnson is needed in emergency. She looked at Richard. Mr. Carter, I've reviewed the initial proposal your assistant sent over. It's extraordinary. Richard stood. We can continue this discussion later, Dr. Johnson. Lives need saving. Marcus nodded and left the room, his head spinning. As he walked toward the emergency department, he couldn't believe what had just happened. It felt like a dream. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Marcus treated patients on autopilot, his mind constantly returning to Richard's proposal. By the end of his shift, he had made a decision. He found Richard in the hospital cafeteria, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and his laptop. I want to see the full proposal, Marcus said, sitting down across from him. All the details. Richard smiled. I hoped you would say that. He turned his laptop around. Let me show you what we have in mind. For the next 2 hours, they discussed the plans in detail. The hospital grant would fund new equipment, additional staff, and renovations to the aging building. The Research Foundation would focus on developing affordable medical technology for underserved areas, starting with Marcus's portable diagnostic system. We're not just talking about donations, Richard explained. We're talking about a true partnership, your medical expertise combined with our technological capabilities and resources. As Marcus listened, he began to see the possibilities. The impact this could have went far beyond Riverside Hospital. It could change healthcare delivery in underserved communities everywhere. Why me? He asked one last time. Really, why me? Richard closed his laptop and looked directly at Marcus. When I was in that hospital bed, I watched you work. I saw your dedication, your skill, your compassion. But I also saw your frustration with the limitations of this place. He gestured around the cafeteria with its chipped paint and outdated furnishings. You deserve better tools. Your patients deserve better care. And I have the means to make that happen. Richard leaned forward. I believe that people come into our lives for a reason. Maybe the reason you saved my life was so I could help you save many more. Marcus considered this. He had never been one to believe in fate or destiny, but he couldn't deny the opportunity in front of him. If I do this, he said slowly, I want to continue seeing patients. I didn't become a doctor to sit behind a desk. Richard nodded. We can make that work. You can split your time between clinical duties and research. And I want control over the research priorities. They need to be based on actual patient needs, not what will make the most profit. Agreed, Richard said without hesitation. This isn't about profit, it's about impact. Marcus took a deep breath. Then I'm in. Richard extended his hand. Welcome to the beginning of something extraordinary, Dr. Johnson. As they shook hands, Marcus felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. His life was about to change dramatically. He thought about all the patients he might be able to help with these new resources. Patients like Mrs. Miller with her broken wrist, or the family from the fender bender during the snowstorm. "When do we start?" he asked. Richard smiled. "We already have." The news spread quickly through Riverside Community Hospital. At first, there were only whispers and rumors. Then Paula Wright called an all-staff meeting to make the official announcement. The hospital would receive a $20 million grant from Carter Innovations, with a focus on expanding the emergency department and trauma center. Many staff members cried when they heard the news. Others looked shocked or disbelieving. For years, they had worked with outdated equipment in a building that needed repairs. Now suddenly everything was about to change. Marcus sat quietly at the back of the room during the announcement. He still felt overwhelmed by it all. Richard stood at the front beside Paula, answering questions from the excited staff. He looked completely at ease, dressed in another expensive suit, speaking confidently about his vision for the hospital's future. After the meeting, Nurse Betty approached Marcus. "Is it true? Are you going to lead some fancy research center now?" Marcus nodded. "Apparently so, though I'll still be seeing patients here part-time." Betty smiled and squeezed his arm. "You deserve this, Dr. Johnson. If anyone was going to get a miracle from a billionaire, I'm glad it was you." Over the next few weeks, Marcus's life changed dramatically. He continued his regular shifts at the hospital, but now he also attended meetings with architects, medical equipment suppliers, and Carter Innovations executives. Richard had rented office space near the hospital where they could work on plans for both the hospital renovation and the new research foundation. One evening, Marcus sat in this office reviewing blueprints for the expanded emergency department. Richard walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're here late," Richard said, placing a cup on the desk in front of Marcus. "Just trying to make sure we get this right," Marcus replied, taking the coffee gratefully. "Once construction starts, changes become expensive." Richard sat down across from him. "How are you holding up?" "This is a lot of change in a short time." Marcus leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. "It's overwhelming, but in a good way. I just keep thinking about how many more people we'll be able to help." "That's what I admire about you," Richard said. "You never lose sight of the patients." Marcus looked at the blueprints spread across his desk. "Sometimes I worry that I'm not qualified for all this. I'm a doctor, not a businessman or a researcher." "That's why we've hired people to handle those aspects," Richard reminded him. "Your job is to provide the medical expertise and vision. You know what these communities need." Marcus nodded slowly. "I've been thinking more about that portable diagnostic system. If we can get it right, it could really change things for rural clinics." Richard's eyes lit up. "Tell me more." For the next hour, they discussed Marcus's ideas. The system would combine several diagnostic tools into one portable, durable, and easy-to-use device. It would be affordable enough for small clinics in underserved areas and would work even with unreliable electricity. "This is exactly why I wanted you for this project," Richard said when Marcus finished explaining. "You understand the real-world challenges these communities face." 2 months after their initial agreement, construction began on the hospital renovations. The first phase focused on expanding the emergency department. Temporary walls were put up, and parts of the hospital became construction zones. Despite the noise and disruption, the staff remained excited and positive. On a particularly busy day, Marcus was treating a young boy with a broken arm when Paula Wright found him. "Dr. Johnson, there's a problem with the construction. They found asbestos in one of the walls they're tearing down." Marcus finished setting the boy's arm before responding. "Have they stopped work in that area?" "Yes, but this will delay things and the removal will be expensive." Marcus nodded. "Let's call Richard. He'll know what to do." They found Richard already at the construction site, talking with the foreman. When he saw Marcus and Paula, he walked over to join them. "I've already contacted a specialist company for the asbestos removal," he said before they could even explain the situation. "They'll be here tomorrow, and don't worry about the cost, it's covered." Paula looked relieved. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." I was concerned this might affect our budget for the new equipment. The equipment budget remains untouched, Richard assured her. This is exactly why we build contingencies into project plans. After Paula left, Richard turned to Marcus. How's your day going, busy? Always, Marcus smiled. But good. A child with a broken arm, an elderly man with pneumonia, the usual mix. Richard checked his watch. Have you eaten lunch? I'd like to discuss something with you. They walked to a small cafe across from the hospital. After ordering, Richard pulled out his tablet. I've been thinking about the research foundation, he said, showing Marcus some documents. We need to make it official. Legal entity, board of directors, the whole thing. Marcus looked at the documents. You want to name it after me? The Marcus Johnson Medical Research Foundation? Richard nodded. It was your vision that inspired this. Your work deserves recognition. Marcus felt uncomfortable. That seems unnecessary. We could just call it the Riverside Foundation or something simple. The name matters, Richard insisted. It tells a story, your story. From performing emergency brain surgery during a snowstorm to leading a foundation that will change healthcare delivery worldwide. Marcus was silent for a moment. My grandmother would have been proud, he said finally. She always believed I would do important things. She was right, Richard said. Now about the board of directors, I'd like you to help choose them. We need people who understand both the medical and community aspects of what we're trying to achieve. They spent the rest of lunch discussing potential board members. Marcus suggested several doctors and nurses from Riverside who had experience working in underserved communities. Richard added names of technology experts and philanthropists who could help with funding and connections. As they walked back to the hospital, Richard said, There's one more thing. The portable diagnostic system, we need to file patents to protect the design. Patents? Marcus frowned. I wasn't thinking about that. I just want to help people. I understand, Richard said, but patents will ensure that the technology isn't stolen by companies that would make it unaffordable. We'll include special licensing for nonprofit organizations and clinics in underserved areas. Marcus considered this. As long as the people who need it can access it, I'm okay with that. When they reached the hospital entrance, Richard's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. I need to take this. Business emergency. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. As Richard walked away taking his call, Marcus stood for a moment watching him. In just a few months, this man had completely changed his life. Sometimes it still felt unreal. Inside the hospital, construction workers moved back and forth carrying materials. Architects consulted blueprints. New medical equipment sat in boxes waiting to be installed. Change was happening all around him. Nurse Betty appeared at his side. Dr. Johnson, your next patient is ready. Marcus nodded and followed her to the examination room. No matter how much his life changed, this part remained the same, helping patients one at a time. And somehow, amid all the meetings and plans and construction, this still felt like the most important part of his day. That evening, as Marcus reviewed the draft bylaws for the new research foundation, he realized how far things had come since that snowy night when a stranger was brought into his emergency room. He could never have imagined where that one emergency surgery would lead. Tomorrow they would meet with engineers to discuss the prototype of the portable diagnostic system. Next week, the first phase of the emergency department renovation would be completed. The pace of change was dizzying, but tonight, Marcus simply felt grateful. Grateful for the chance to make a difference on a scale he had never thought possible. Grateful that a billionaire had crashed his car near Riverside Community Hospital during the worst snowstorm in 20 years. Sometimes life's greatest opportunities came from the most unexpected places. 1 year passed quickly. The once aging Riverside Community Hospital had transformed completely. The emergency department was now twice its original size, with state-of-the-art equipment and enough staff to handle any crisis. The entire building had been renovated, with new patient rooms, updated operating theaters, and a dedicated trauma center. Beside the hospital stood a new building, the Johnson Carter Medical Research Center. Inside, doctors, engineers, and scientists worked together to develop affordable medical technology for underserved communities. On the day of the grand opening ceremony, Marcus stood in his office looking out the window at the crowd gathering in front of the research center. News vans lined the street. People held cameras and phones ready to capture the event. Richard knocked on the open door. "Ready for your big speech?" Marcus turned, adjusting his tie nervously. "As ready as I'll ever be. I'm not good at public speaking." "You'll do fine," Richard assured him. "Just speak from the heart. Tell them why this matters." They walked together to the ceremony. A stage had been set up with rows of chairs facing it. Many local officials were there, along with hospital staff, donors, and community members. Nurse Betty waved excitedly when she saw Marcus. Paula Wright, looking more relaxed than Marcus had ever seen her, welcomed everyone to the microphone. "1 year ago, our hospital received an extraordinary gift, a $20 million grant from Carter Innovations. Today, we celebrate not just a renovated hospital, but a new research center that will change healthcare delivery around the world." She introduced Richard, who spoke briefly about his company's commitment to making healthcare more accessible. Then he called Marcus to the stage. Marcus took a deep breath as he approached the microphone. He looked out at the crowd and saw many familiar faces, nurses, doctors, and patients he had treated over the years. "1 year ago," he began, "I was just a doctor trying to do my best in an underfunded hospital. During a terrible snowstorm, a patient was brought to our emergency room with a serious head injury. That patient turned out to be Richard Carter." Marcus glanced at Richard, who nodded encouragingly from his seat on the stage. "I had no idea that night would change everything. Not just for me, but for this hospital, this community, and hopefully, for healthcare in underserved areas everywhere." Marcus explained how the hospital renovation had already impacted patient care. Wait times were shorter. More lives were being saved. Staff no longer had to work with outdated equipment or worry about supply shortages. "But the story doesn't end with a better hospital," Marcus continued. "The Johnson Carter Medical Research Center represents something even bigger, a commitment to developing medical technology that works for everyone, not just those who can afford it." He described their first major project, the portable diagnostic system that was now being tested in rural clinics across the country. This device combines the functions of several expensive machines into one affordable, durable unit that can work even with limited electricity. It can diagnose common illnesses, monitor vital signs, and transmit data to specialists for consultation. And it costs a fraction of what traditional equipment costs. The audience applauded. Marcus saw many hospital staff nodding with pride. None of this would have been possible without Richard Carter's vision and generosity, but it also wouldn't have been possible without the dedicated staff of Riverside Community Hospital, who have worked tirelessly for years with limited resources. Marcus looked directly at Nurse Betty and the other staff members in the front rows. "This is your achievement too. You never gave up on our patients even when things seemed hopeless." As Marcus concluded his speech, he felt a wave of emotion. This partnership began with a snowstorm and a car accident, but it has grown into something that will save thousands of lives. Thank you all for being part of this journey. The applause was loud and long. When Marcus returned to his seat, Richard leaned over. "Perfect. Exactly what people needed to hear." After the ceremony, there was a reception with food and drinks. Marcus moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions about the research center. Several reporters asked for interviews, which still felt strange to him. Later, Richard found Marcus standing alone, taking a moment of quiet. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" Richard asked. Marcus nodded. "A little. I'm not used to this much attention." "You should be proud," Richard said. "The portable diagnostic system is already making a difference. The first batch of units are performing well in the field tests. I got an email yesterday from a clinic in a rural area," Marcus said. "They diagnosed a child with a heart condition that would have gone unnoticed without the device. The child is now getting treatment." Richard smiled. "That's what this is all about. One life at a time." They walked through the new research center, observing the scientists and doctors working together. In one lab, engineers were developing the next version of the diagnostic system, making it even more durable and easy to use. "You know," Richard said quietly, "when I asked why you became a doctor, you told me you wanted to make a difference. I think it's safe to say you've accomplished that goal." Marcus smiled, thinking about the patients who would benefit from their work. "We both have. Sometimes life's biggest changes come from its most unexpected moments." 6 months later, Marcus stood in a small clinic thousands of miles from Riverside. He was here with a team from the research center to install the portable diagnostic systems and train the local medical staff on how to use them. The clinic had no running water and only intermittent electricity. The nearest hospital was 4 hours away on roads that often became impassable during the rainy season. The local doctor had been providing care with minimal equipment for over 20 years. "This will change everything for us," the doctor said as Marcus demonstrated the device. "We can diagnose conditions we could only guess at before." Marcus showed him how to use each function, how to maintain the device, and how to troubleshoot common issues. The doctor was a quick learner, eager to put the new technology to use. That evening, as Marcus prepared to leave, a woman arrived at the clinic carrying a sick child. Marcus watched as the local doctor used the diagnostic system to examine the child. Within minutes, he had identified the problem, a respiratory infection that could be treated with antibiotics. Before this, the doctor told Marcus as they watched the mother leave with her child and the medicine, "I would have had to guess. Sometimes I guessed wrong." As Marcus flew home the next day, he thought about how far things had come. The research center was now working on several new projects: solar-powered refrigeration units for vaccines, telehealth systems for remote consultations, and training programs for healthcare workers in underserved areas. Riverside Hospital had become a model for community hospitals nationwide. Other wealthy donors, inspired by Richard's example, had started similar programs in their own communities, and it had all begun with a snowstorm, a car accident, and an emergency surgery. When Marcus arrived back at Riverside, Richard was waiting for him at the airport. "How did it go?" Richard asked as they walked to the car. "Even better than expected," Marcus replied. "The local doctor was already using the system to diagnose patients before I left." Richard nodded, pleased. "What's next?" "We have requests from clinics in 50 different countries." Marcus smiled. "One step at a time. But I think we're onto something big here." As they drove back to Riverside, passing the hospital and research center that had changed so many lives, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the opportunities he had been given, but for the chance to make a real difference in the world. Sometimes saving one life could lead to saving many more, and sometimes the stranger you help today might be the person who helps you change the world tomorrow.